Welcome to our today's class. The course involving Diploma in Information Studies. In line with those doing certificate and in line with those doing higher diploma in records and information management. Today I'm going to focus basically on diploma part or the diploma scenario in a manner whereby I'm going first to explain to you the units which are involved in Diploma in Information Studies and how they relate with one another. So the unit or the course of Information Studies, that is Diploma in Information Studies, it basically entails information relating with records management. When you talk about a record is any document that it is written, any document inscribed, any document drawn, or in a certain manner we can say a record is any information that has a base which contains an impression that finally gives a message. Diploma in Information Studies, it is a course that is mostly examined by the Kenya National Examination Council, whereby one is required to have a C- and above for him or her to partake this course. The course entails 6 units, and the first unit is called Information Resources. The second unit is Dissemination of Information. The third unit is Organization and Retrieval of Information Materials. The fourth unit is Conservation and Restoration of Information Materials. The fifth unit is Management of Information Centers. That is management of libraries and other information centers. The sixth unit, we focus on archival studies. In line with that, being a non-modular course code 2813, examinable by the Kenya National Examination Council, the student is further required to provide a project which entails the course specialization and a business plan which entails entrepreneurship. So basically, any student doing Diploma in Information Studies, a non-modular course, it is a course that takes a minimum period of 1 year to a maximum period of 2 years or 1.5 years. Now, I want to give you a correlation involving the units that you're having. The mother of information studies in Diploma is the unit of archival studies. It is in archival studies that we first start by understanding what record is. We try to understand the classification of records. We try to understand the institutions or the buildings in which records are housed or where records are kept. Basically, in this course, we will be focusing on 4 institutional resources. Focusing on institutional resources, we basically mean the buildings that house information materials. And the first building we are dealing with here, we are dealing with libraries. The second building we are dealing with we are dealing with archives. The third building, we are dealing with publishing firms. And lastly, we are dealing with documentation centers and media centers. The unit of information resources goes hand in hand with the unit of dissemination of information and the unit of organization and retrieval of information. Information resources basically entails three, or is basically subdivided into three main phases. The first phase of information resources entails the material resources. In material resources, we try to understand the mode in which information is presented. And in this manner, we try to understand that information is either presented in form of documentary source or non-documentary source. Or we can talk of information being presented in form of print media or in form of non-print media. The second phase involved in information resources, we talk of the institutional resources. Institutional resources involves the buildings that house information materials. As earlier on, I've talked of the libraries, the archives, the documentation centers, the record centers, the media houses, and the publishing firms. All these, they are charged with the responsibility of safeguarding records. And why are we safeguarding records? We are conserving information so that we can retrieve them at time when their need will arise. Or at the same time, you find we are conserving this information because of the values that are contained in them. Like we have the financial values, we have the cultural values, we have the historical values, opportunity to study, and so on and so forth. That's the main reason as to why we do what? We conserve, or we try to give care and maintenance to information materials. So in the unit of information resources, basically we are focusing on three main phases. The first phase is material resources. We find the information either in form of print media or in form of non-print media. The second phase entails the institutional resources, where these records are going to be kept, where these material resources are going to be kept, either in form of print media or in form of non-print media. And the last phase involved in information resources is the human resources. Human resources entails the personnels who are charged with the responsibility of safeguarding records. Assuming you're going to an institution to look for a course, you're going to look for information, then that means you must first identify the building. After identifying the building, you go there physically. You will get the human personnel. Those are the human resources. They're going to provide information to you either in form of print media or either in form of what? Non-print media. Now you find the unit of information resources is very easy for any student to understand in a manner whereby you must be able to know that information resources entails only three phases. That is, the material resources, the institutional resources, or number three, the human resources. Now we can try to go further and try and get much more clarification. Now on the interrelationship between the unit of information resources and the unit of dissemination of information. Dissemination of information entails the procedure whereby we are transferring information or we are distributing information, whether specifically requested for or not, by the users of information. That means in this case, we are going to have two main users. We are going to have the actual users of information, and number two, we are going to have the potential users of information. The potential users and the actual users are the ones who are going to make the information resources to be made readily available to the users who are in need of it. Now, in this case, what we try to understand is this. The material resources, which is the first phase in the unit of information resources, we focus on it in the unit of dissemination of information as the reference sources of information. We focus on it as the reference sources of information, or sometimes we try to look at it as the bibliographic sources of information. So in a point, we come into an agreement and we try to understand that material resources of information, either presented in form of print or non-print media, we can further refer them as reference sources of information, or we can further refer to them as bibliographic sources of information, or at the same time, in the unit of organization and retrieval of information, we try to refer to them as the finding aids or the information retrieval tools. Finding aids to information materials. A finding aid, it is a tool that basically gives a reference to users of information. Now let's assume in this manner, we are having encyclopedia as a print media. At the same time, the same encyclopedia can be presented in form of non-print media, so that it can be distributed to varieties of printing firms, whereby they can be printed. So in this case, you find an encyclopedia, it is a reference source. At the same time, it is a material source, a material resource. At the same time, it can link information seekers to the available source of information they are looking for, so thereby acting as a bibliographic source of information. So in summary, sometimes we try and say that all print media and all non-print media, which are referred to as material resources, they can further be referred to as reference sources of information. They can be referred to as bibliographic sources of information, or they can be referred to as the information retrieval tools or the finding aids used in retrieving information materials. Now, all this basically in the unit of information resources, we will be focusing on 13 print medias. We will start by focusing on the bibliographic sources of information. We have the indexes, the catalogs, and the abstracts. And the index, catalogs, and abstracts, they are the ones that forms the pregnancy of the unit of organization and retrieval of information, whereby by the end of the day, we try to understand what cataloging is, bearing in mind that cataloging involves two main phases, that is descriptive cataloging and subject cataloging. We try to understand indexing part of it, the indexing processes, the cataloging processes, the abstracting processes, the abstracting languages, indexing languages, cataloging languages, the types of catalogs, types of indexes, types of abstracts. All these, they are focused under the bibliographic sources of information, which will be focusing on them in the unit of information resources. So basically, you find the unit of information resources and the unit of dissemination of information, they are one and the same. But where clarity comes in dissemination of information, we are distributing information. We are transferring information from one user to another, either an actual user or a potential user. So by the end of the day, you will realize that in dissemination of information, we basically focus on the following topics: selective dissemination of information. We must select either the potential or the actual users of whom information is going to be disseminated to them. Number two, we focus on current awareness services. Number three, we focus on user education. Those are the three main topics that holds the pregnancy of dissemination of information. Selective dissemination of information, current awareness services, and user education. Before we create an awareness of information, we must first select. We must select the users of whom they are going to receive the information. Either the actual users or either the potential users. We have to select them. The more we are creating the awareness, the more we are giving them the information, is the same way we are trying to teach them on how they can use what? The information. So in this case, you find dissemination of information gives an ongoing process whereby it helps the users or the learners to be able to identify the exact place, or to identify where information is going to be located or where the information is going to be disseminated. At the same time, the users are going to receive the information and they're going to get the relevant skills, the relevant knowledge that is going to help them to ascertain and be able to use the information precisely for the purpose of understanding what is involved in information studies. So all this, we focus it in information resources and dissemination of information. So you find by the end of the day, the unit of information resources, dissemination of information, and organization and retrieval of information materials, they go hand in hand. In our next lesson, I'll be focusing now on the topic of dissemination of information, but much I'll be giving clarification on the reference sources of information, bibliographic sources of information, and I try to go further and give the relevant services that reference sources give and bibliographic sources give.